Hello everybody and welcome. I want to talk a little bit today about early warfare in Civilization 6 because I did receive quite a few questions in my Discord and quite a few messages about this. A lot of novice players are actually wondering how to approach the Civilization 6 early warfare. So of course every time you go into a game you do actually choose a civilization, you do actually have a spawn bias that lands you on either like coastal or maybe inland or maybe tundra and so on. All of those are actually, let's put them down into positioning because it does depend where are you positioned on the map, what kind of neighbors you're gonna have and so on and so forth. Now I did get a few big categories that we will talk about today, and let's actually go through them one by one. The first one that I did actually touch a little bit about earlier, it's positioning, and what I mean by positioning is mostly the distance between you and your opponent, or how many opponents do you have. Is it naval? Is it on land? Do you get there fast? Do you get there slowly? Do you have one-tile chokes? Do you have rivers that you have to pass through? And so on and so forth. All of this information you can actually find by scouting, and it is very, very recommended to actually get a few scouts out at the beginning of the game so you can actually see the land around you and properly judge where to put your cities, and of course what kind of allies you might have, what kind of targets, like war targets you might have, city-states and so on and so forth. The second one is information. Getting a scout into your opponent's territory will give you the information about how his land looks like, his capabilities, his also strategic resources. If you do discover the technology that, for example, reveals horses at animal husbandry or iron at bronze working, you will get to see if it takes him a little while to improve it, if it is easy for him to improve it, if he already did manage to improve those tiles, and of course what kind of strategics does he have in his cities. You can also go a little bit forward on this, try to get yourself some advantages from actually pillaging those tiles if you do get to war early. On technologies, very important, extremely important. Be careful if you do want to go at against an opponent at an early stage of the game. You have to get to the classical unit technologies. Some things might be defended, for example, like horses will be defended by anti-cav units, but they're hit and miss, and depending on how much bonuses your opponent will have, you might end up in quite a bit of trouble. Also, the anti-cav unit, the spearman doesn't actually give the city center as much strength as would a swordsman or a horseman, so be careful with that. You do need to build yourself some advantages. Of course, judging how your opponent will actually approach the game. If it's going for example, you see him putting down a commercial, well, that means he actually spent a lot of science into getting that commercial instead of going for encampments or going for horseback riding, which does open up an opportunity for you to actually go and well, punish him for this, take his cities away from him. Now be careful, again, coming back to how much time it takes you to actually get there because of the positioning, and of course how long does it take you to actually train those units, get some advantages for yourself. On the resources tab, you do have to be careful about your own resources, and not to mention be careful about what your opponent is doing with his own resources. If you have to improve your resources so you can gather them in your stockpiles, so when you actually want to start training units, you have the resources available for you, or upgrade with the necessary prerequisites. So for example, horses will require the horses in your stockpile to actually get those out, and of course it takes quite a bit for them to actually accumulate in your territory. The same can be said about iron, although a lot of the times the players do prefer to upgrade the units. Unfortunately, well, it kind of depends on how many gold points you have per turn, and of course at the same time how many did you stockpile in the previous turns. So if you do manage to actually get a decent amount, yes, that is a viable strategy. If not, you might end up with well, the iron to upgrade, the units to upgrade, the warriors, but no gold to actually get going. So you got to be really careful about this. Every kind of delay will actually significantly lower your chances of pulling off a successful attack. And on that note, I do have to point out A lot of the times early warfare in Civilization 6, especially in the multiplayer scene, is kind of frowned upon because you do end up putting a little too many resources into going to war instead of getting your seeming abilities going, like putting down campuses, putting down theater squares, maybe a wonder, maybe a harbor, commercial, something else other than warring, other than pumping out units. If you do not get a good return on investment on the war, so for example getting the cities out of away from your opponent, taking him down very early in the game, there is a high probability that you might not get to catch up with everybody else in the game in a free-for-all environment. In a teamers environment is a little bit different because, to be honest, well, in teamers taking out a player is extremely valuable. You go into a 4 versus 3 situation and the opposing team will have lower chances of winning the game and of course catching up after that. The fifth subject that I want to talk about is advantages. What do I mean by this? Every civilization does have some unique units. It does have some unique strengths that it can rely on. So for example, you do get Scythia with an extra +5 attack against wounded units. You do get Persia with a +3 and so on and so forth. So maybe some of course, the Immortals, Nubian Pitati Archers, there are so many unique units at the beginning of the game. Extremely valuable to benefit from if you are gonna go to war. It's either on the defense or on the offense. You can, of course, judge by yourself in every game how you should approach this. But it's very important when you do go to war to actually get as many advantages as possible for your units to guarantee the war success. So combat strength is very important to take a look at. Advantages like oligarchy, for example, for swordsmen are going to be extremely important. You do need to try to judge as much as possible if you will have the strength to punch through the defenses of your opponent, taking into consideration its 45 bonus, taking into consideration the land available, if he's going to defend on hills, if he does have, if he would put victor in the city, and so on and so forth. Every little bit of combat strength that you add to your units will increase your chances of actually pulling off a successful attack against your opponent, or of course on the defense. Every little bit of combat strength that you can add on your own units will increase the chances of success. And now being said, and that being said, a lot of the times on the defense, it is quite important to actually fortify your units and try as much as possible to not attack unless you guarantee a kill and you can afford to start trading units using a forward line of melee units or cav units that will withstand a lot more damage, and of course a backline of archers. It's gonna actually help you win the game much easier. Also, I do want to point out, whenever you want to defend the city, be careful of the city's strength and do not allow your opponent, for example, to attack into your city with strong units, with classical units, horses or swordsmen, when it is very low in its defense. So for example, every time you take a look at the garrison, you can actually see when you put a horse in it, it will get extra bonuses from having a horse inside of it. That actually means the units attacking into the city will receive a lot more damage and will do a lot less damage against that city center, significantly increasing the chances of that city surviving. So in most situations, you do want to have a classical unit inside of a city center so it can beef up that city strength. Now, I know you might be tempted to actually put the archers inside because, well, they are kind of squishy and you do want to actually have some defense for those archers. It's not always very good unless you actually do manage to put a defensive line in front of the city, so your attacker will not be able to punch through, and you can use the city center with an archer inside of it, and it's of course maybe walls. That will be very, very, very useful indeed. Again, be careful when your attacker might actually get some opportunities to attack into your city center. Do not let him actually attack into it without a classical unit inside of it. It's the same thing can actually be talked about on the offense, you're going to have the same problems on the offense when you're talking about judging who, when, and where to attack in what kind of units and so on and so forth. You have to take into account the city strength and of course the defenses, not to mention of course rivers, land, hills, forests, and so on, which actually matter quite a bit to your success. Resupply chain. This is something that I've seen ignored quite a few times. A lot of times you actually try to build 4, 5, maybe 6 units. For example, let's say horses. You do get a gem for them, so they get extra movement, extra damage, and you do not actually follow up with more units. You gotta expect that you will lose quite a few units when it comes to the battlefield. So having an idea of how many turns it will take you to actually move from your cities to your opponent's cities, and at the same time having an idea of how much time it takes you to actually get those units on the front line will help you out so much. Don't forget to actually add the time you need to train those units. Using cards like maneuver, like a Gogi, will significantly increase your chances to get the units faster. And of course, if you do have the resources, it will be more likely that you're gonna manage to punch through your opponent's defenses, including his own resupply chain, even though you gotta take into account he's closer to his cities, so his resupply chain will be much smaller, much smaller. It's much faster, I should say. His units will only move a few turns, while yours, or maybe 1 turn, while yours will actually need to move 4, 5, 6, depending on how much land you need to cover. A lot of the times, I've also seen players do this in the next part of the game, in the mid to late game. It is very important for them to actually be careful if they do manage to significantly increase the land and the units they have to benefit from going against his opponents. I've seen wars started with just a few tanks, and then of course they followed up with a lot more artillery behind them because they knew they could build them quite quickly. The resupply chain has also been created. For example, a lot of the times the players do use military engineers to create roads towards their opponents, so they can actually help out their units get to the front line much faster. It helps so much to guarantee the success. There's all this finite amount of production that you can benefit from, and of course if you do manage to outproduce your opponent and also keep on winning on the battlefield, managing to guarantee kills instead of trades, that will help you out win more games. So I think that's about it. If you do want to catch me on the live stream, I'm more than happy to see your questions over there on twitch.tv/OnSpotTV. If you have another question mark that you would like to know, leave a comment down below. And of course, I can only say, well, subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you with more information about Civilization 6. Bye, bye, bye.